Hi, I'm Tyler, an engineer here at Statsig, and today I'm going to be talking a bit about what's sort of happening under the hood as you're making use of Statsig and sort of helping you understand what's actually happening here, particularly what sort of information is coming back to us and how does that sort of get used. And so in our last couple of videos, we talked about getting a super simple React app up and running, making use of Statsig in that React app, in particular for doing things like checking a gate. But let's talk a little bit about how some of that is getting sent back to us. In particular, one concept that you'll hear a lot about when talking to Statsig or about Statsig is what we call exposure events. What that is saying, hey, this person saw this experience at this time. When you're looking at diagnostics for a given gate or experiment, you'll see a sort of somewhat undeduped version of that. We are applying deduplication to that for things like the same user checking the same gate a bunch of times in a row. But generally speaking, you're seeing just exposure events flowing through. There's sort of two modes that you could think of for how experimentation works, or analyzing results works. One is you could have this giant table of every single one of your users and say, hey, this user should get this gate or this experience on this gate. We don't actually have that giant table. In particular, it would be kind of onerous for us to transmit that giant table over to your servers and have you have to store that giant table too if you're using a server SDK. So rather than we do everything sort of very deterministically and then just write down, hey, this person saw this thing. So what's coming back here is those, hey, this person saw this experience. That is going to get transmitted to us every time one of these check gates happens with some deduplication. The other type of information that you'll often send our way is what we call log events. So in addition to saying, hey, this person saw this version of this gate or experiment, and that lets us, sort of say, cool, who saw test, who saw control, let's compare some metrics. You might also log a bunch of stuff to us that sort of forms the foundation for those metrics. In particular, I have this sort of counter React app. I might want to know, hey, how many times are people pressing increment? How many times are people pressing reset, right? So I could go ahead and actually make use of the same client that we used for checking gates and actually go ahead and log events with it. So on that counter itself, I'm going to go ahead and import the client again. I'm going to grab the client again. And then when we increment, rather than just setting our count, I'm going to also do what we call logging an event. Counter. Or maybe sort of increment. And then here on the reset side, I'm going to do something very similar and say client.log event reset. And so now, every time someone goes and presses one of these buttons, it's going to tell Statsig, and sort of therefore you, hey, someone actually went and pressed this button. It will have all the information about them that you already have in the user object that we initialized with previously, and that lets you do a lot of sort of very straightforward metrics sort of out of the box. And so now I'm actually logging events back to Statsig. Those events will hit us and then take a little bit to process, but in about 10-15 minutes, you should start seeing, hey, this event happened for this user, and furthermore, being able to start making metrics on top of that. And so with that, you kind of have the foundations to not only have all of these switches that are controlling who is even seeing parts of your app, seeing different versions of things in your app, but actually actually logging things to make metrics out of, to understand, hey, obviously if I remove the counter, the group without the counter is not going to increment very much. But if I do something like change the text for my increment button, or change how much it increments by, or something like that, is that more engaging for folks? Are they incrementing more? Things like that. You can actually start to understand real user behavior on your app. In the next episode, we'll talk about sort of the server-side versions, a lot of these sort of client-side features, and some of the differences between the two. Thanks.